views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronx Talk. Last month, the Bronx Freedom Fund, which is an outgrowth of the Bronx Defenders, announced that they're going to develop a bail project to expend bail support to as many as 150,000 defendants across the country, under the theory, which is not too hard to understand, that high bail has greater impact on people with low incomes. Also, last week, Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. sent a strong letter to the chief judge of the state and to U.S. immigration officials protesting the presence of ICE, Immigration's Customs Enforcement, in courthouses as a way of identifying and ultimately deporting undocumented immigrants. So high bail and ICE in the courts on Bronx Talk tonight. Both are challenging and important issues, particularly for the people of the Bronx. Please join me in welcoming the Managing Director of the Bronx Defenders Immigration Practice, Sarah Deri Oshiro. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you.
And also the Special Counsel to the Bronx Defenders Criminal Practice, Scott Levy. Nice to have you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to do bail first, and so let's start with that. Mr. Levy, talk to me about the nature of bail and why high bail is such an issue and has become such an issue for poor people and particularly people in the Bronx.
Sure. So bail is, when we talk about bail, what we're fundamentally talking about is the mechanism that the courts use to detain people pre-trial. That is, while people are waiting after having been charged and are awaiting trial. Bail is the mechanism that the courts use to detain people to make sure that they come back to court. And in theory, what bail is supposed to do is, courts set a certain bail amount, and then the theory is that people pay that amount of money to the court or to a bail bondsman, and that sort of financial obligation to the court is what makes sure that people actually come back to court. And so you can see how just a system that operates on money bail can really be detrimental to low-income communities and low-income communities of color in particular. But what we have seen at the Bronx Defenders, and I think what the Bronx Freedom Fund, the charitable bail fund, which is the outgrowth of the Bronx Defenders, has shown is people don't really need a financial incentive to come back to court. Statistics show that people come back to court on their own voluntarily without any sort of financial incentive to bring them back to court. And that the money bail system that we have in place right now really only serves to erect obstacles for our clients, their families, and their communities. And so we are really concerned about basically having as many people at liberty while they fight their cases, and so that the presumption of innocence, which is supposed to guide our system, really can have meaning.
And I guess a way to illustrate it would be that if you had the bail is set just at random at $100,000, and there is somebody who is well-to-do or has the resources or has relatives who has that money, that person has a chance to be freed to be able to more effectively defend themselves, work their case, et cetera, et cetera. But somebody who doesn't have that kind of money or access to that kind of money then goes to jail. I mean, that's basically the imbalanced scale that we're talking about.
That's absolutely right.
Is there any consideration for a judge who sets bail to say, well, almost to like prorate it? Well, this person is a little, has a little more resource to deal with, so we'll set it a little higher, so the burden to put up bail would be equal to somebody who is lower, and then they'll set a lower bail for somebody who doesn't have the resource. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, does that figuring go in the assignment of bail?
Well, in theory, judges are supposed to be doing that. Money bail is really supposed to be a mechanism for release. It's not supposed to be a mechanism for detention. Judges, when they set monetary bail, are supposed to look at a person's ability to pay the amount of bail that is set, because again, it's supposed to enable people to be released pending their trial. But what we see and what we've seen over time is that judges really don't do that type of analysis. They don't look at people's ability to pay. Instead, what courts across the state do is, judges across the state do, is they set sort of an arbitrary amount of bail, and without any sort of regard for that person's ability to pay. So you're right to point out that people who are well off, or people who have money, are easily able to make bail.
More easily.
More easily, yes,
fair.
of course. While people, low-income folks, just can't meet even small amounts of bail. And so one of the things that we are constantly pushing for is for judges to really set bail, to calibrate bail, to an amount that our clients can actually make.
Yeah, that was a good word, calibrate. That's a way of looking at it. It just occurred to me during this discussion, if you have somebody with limited resources and you set bail at $250,000, you might as well set it at $5 million, because they can't come up with that 200. Generally, won't be able to come up. It was interesting that the young man who's accused of stabbing the students in a high school made bail because he had a base of support and political support and other support for his case. I thought that was fascinating. You used the term money bail a couple of times. Is there another form of bail that could be used? Or, I mean, the only one I'm familiar with is a financial thing.
Yeah, well, so one thing just to understand in the New York context is that, in particularly in New York City, is we actually release most people from court without any monetary conditions whatsoever. We release approximately 70% of people whose cases survive arraignments on their own recognizance. So they don't have to put money up. And what we know is that people who don't have to put money up still come back to court at the same rates as people who are actually posting bail. So there's a small segment of people that actually have to post money bail. The interesting thing about New York and New York's bail statute is that it actually provides 9 different ways to post bail. Most people are only familiar with money bail, which is you actually have to put cash up.
What I was saying, yeah.
Cash up with the court, or going to a bail bondsman, right? Which is where you pay a bail bondsman some amount of money, and then they make a promise to the court that if you don't come back, they will pay. The thing is, there are 7 other alternative forms of bail that don't require people to put up money up front at all. Right? Some are basically you're released on your own recognizance, and only if you fail to show up to court would you actually be on the hook for any sort of money.
Penalty or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there are other mechanisms for releasing people with conditions or programs or access to services, or really just reminders to come to court, which is what most people really need, that don't require money at all. And so we are big proponents of courts and judges utilizing these alternative forms of bail, or no bail at all. Because we just don't think it's necessary.
I want to challenge something that you had said in the beginning, and that was the large percentage of people who, in essence, would show up anyway. I wonder about that. Somebody accused of a crime, either they believe that they've been framed and they really are going to have a problem, or somebody who really did it and said, you know what, I got to get out of here. It's only a matter of, isn't it only a matter of, I don't want to give anybody a suggestion, but getting in a car and getting out? So, somebody who really feels endangered would just split. And so I guess the numbers that you presented are accurate, and I'm not a criminal, so I don't have the criminal mindset, but I would think that there are people who would do that, and that this really is some assurance that we're going to be able to, have them in court when we need them.
Well, I think that's actually a fairly common misconception, right? That people who are charged with crimes are incentivized to flee. What we know is people charged with low-level misdemeanors or even very serious felonies, if they're released, they come back to court. People generally come back to court. They understand their obligations to the court, and they come back. And what we know is that in New York City, more than 85% of people come back to court in all types of cases. And furthermore, what we also know is the reason that people miss court is not because they've fled the jurisdiction or hopped in a car and are hightailing it out west.
I guess I've seen too many movies. I mean, I don't know what to tell you.
But most people just, lose track of their calendar. most people who miss court come back to court within 30 days, right? They return themselves.
They realize that they've
Yes.
made an error, or they've got some notification. They say, "Oh my goodness, I better get."
And the truth is, in New York City, where we have so many cases coming through the court system, right? We have tens of thousands of cases coming through the Bronx every year. And in the Bronx, where we have really outrageous court delay, right? Our cases in the Bronx take far longer than they do in other parts of the city.
Somebody could languish in
Yeah.
jail for a very long time.
Languish in jail, or they
Well,
can just
we
be
know-
going to work.
We know the Khalif Browder, the tragedy there. That was
Absolutely.
part of it. So what do you do? You bail people out. You provide bail in certain cases. I guess the question would be, how do you choose? And then let's talk about the expansion. And I certainly want to bring Sarah into the discussion because she's been sitting here patiently.
Well, so
That's another whole issue.
One thing to just sort of make very clear is the Bronx Defenders doesn't bail anybody out. The Bronx Defenders was involved in the formation of a separate nonprofit, which is the Bronx Freedom Fund, which is an independent 501c3 that does work independently of the Bronx Defenders. And actually, the Bronx Freedom Fund posts bail for not just Bronx Defenders clients, but legal aid clients and clients in both the Bronx and Queens. And the work that they're doing is really phenomenal. And I think what they've shown is sort of what we've been talking about here, which is that they post bail for people. So people don't have any financial obligation to come back to court. And the people for whom they post bail come back to court at the same rates or even higher rates than people who post bail. So having that financial obligation to the court actually doesn't seem to affect people's appearance in court at all. But the Bronx Freedom Fund, which is just a really incredible organization, has both done a lot of great work to get people out of jail and allow them to sort of carry on with their lives while they're fighting their cases. But it has also shown just how ineffective and unnecessary our current bail system really is.
So this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk with Ms. Oshiro about ICE and the courts, and then we're going to get back to you before the end of the show,
Great.
and we're going to ask you to play legislator and give us what we need to have to correct this system in your eyes so that it's fair for the people who need to be protected from people who do need to be tried and convicted, and also fair to people who are going through the legal system.
Sure.
So hang on there. And Ms. Oshiro, thank you for your patience. So the borough president very passionately wrote a very strong letter saying that his offices are in the Bronx County Courthouse, which we know, and that there are many people who come in for many reasons. Are we aware that ICE is camping out in there? Are they sitting there in uniform? Do they sit there plain clothed and just say, that's the guy we want? How does this work, and what, I'm not asking you to speak for the borough president, but give me a sense of what is the kind of thing that he was very upset about.
Sure. Well, let me step back and just give you a little bit of context and then answer some of those pointed questions you're
Sure.
asking. In general, right, in the United States, there are somewhere in the ballpark of about 12 million undocumented people in this country, and simply speaking, the federal government can't deport them all, right? You cannot, there is not the ability to do so, and under previous presidential administrations, for example, under the President Obama's administration, they were very clear, the government was clear about who was a priority for deportation among the universe of people who could be subjected to deportation proceedings. There was sort of limitations about whom the government wanted to prioritize in terms of actually apprehending and processing those individuals for removal proceedings. Under this current political administration—
Let's just go back to that 1 second. And those were essentially people who had committed crimes, guilty of crimes, and those people were certainly at the top of the list.
The people at the top of the list under President Obama's administration were individuals who had more serious criminal records.
That's a much fairer way to put it. Okay, I accept that.
And so, shortly after the current administration took power, they were pretty clear about defining who was a priority for removal under this administration. And simply speaking, it was basically anyone and everyone who is subject to removal.
Who was undocumented.
Undocumented, but also green card holders, lawful permanent residents, may be subject to removal proceedings based on certain criminal convictions that they have. And I'm going to be honest, it can be very, very simple misdemeanor offenses that could render a green card holder subject to deportation.
Like unpaid parking ticket?
Well, jumping the turnstile, shoplifting, pettit larceny, which is a misdemeanor, simple like misdemeanor marijuana possessions.
Right.
So very simple stuff. And as I said, right, under this administration, everyone's a priority. So basically what we see is immigration can arrest anyone anywhere with a few limitations and exceptions about safe spaces. They can get people on the street, at their homes, at their workplaces, and under previous administrations, every once in a while there would be ICE officers present in courthouses in the Bronx. But what we've seen is as of November 15th of 2017, we saw courthouse arrests spike from 10 in the year past to 110. So we saw a 900% increase in the number of people who were apprehended in courthouses in New York City.
And that process, again, just to redefine what I was saying, is that they wait till they say their name or they know what they look like, and are they uniformed or are they simply, plain clothes?
Generally, they're
officers?
plain clothes.
Wow. So you could walk in there.
You might be able to see a badge around their neck, but generally they're in plain clothes.
That would be hard to define because there are many law enforcement officials in the courthouse or people with badges. It could be an NYPD detective.
It could be any wide array of law enforcement officers. And the general pattern that we see is that they might know that they're here for a guy with a particular name, but they don't know who that guy is and what he looks like until the criminal case is called and the person goes up and has their case called. And it's only upon exiting the courtroom or even exiting the courthouse that the ICE officers will follow that person, pick him or her up, and then take them into custody, into ICE custody. And I mean, this is a huge problem for many reasons.
And so the effect of that would be that if you need to come into court, maybe you're innocent about something, or you may have a very simple issue that you want to deal with, that very simple issue could turn into a really big problem.
A nightmarish deportation proceeding, yes.
Wow.
And not only that, you might, if you get picked up, let's say you go to court for your second court date after you've been arraigned, and you are innocent, you want to take this case to trial, you also then lose your right to have your day in court, because when you get picked up by an immigration agent as you're exiting court, if you've pleaded not guilty, then you're sent to an immigration detention center, which is usually in a New Jersey jail across the river, in bed space that's rented by ICE, or Hudson County Jail, or Bergen County Jail. And all of a sudden, you have a catch-22 where you're seeing an immigration judge being processed for deportation, but you also have an open case in the Bronx that you never have resolved. So it actually—
Which is not good for anybody. There could be plaintiffs involved. There could be damages. Who knows? I mean, it could be anything.
Absolutely. And to be clear, right, we are a public defender organization. So the people that we see most frequently impacted by this are Bronx residents who have been accused of crimes, but also Bronx residents who are parents who are scared to come to family court in proceedings where we represent the parents who are trying to be reunified with their children. And whether or not somebody gets picked up, in the criminal court, there's a ripple effect of fear. Litigants are scared to go to family court to seek a custody order or visitation agreements. People are scared to bring their landlord to court in housing court, even if there have been violations of housing law. So general civil court proceedings. We're seeing a chilling effect, not just in the criminal courthouse with respect to our clients' willingness and fear to come to court in criminal court.
To take it out of the realm of the hypothetical, you have seen this happen, and you know people who have gone through this and maybe now or at some point were incarcerated in a detention center?
Absolutely, yes. The Bronx Defenders represents people in deportation proceedings as well. We have a contract with the city through which we get to provide representation to all detained immigrants who are facing removal, that's deportation proceedings, at the Varick Street Immigration Court, which is in Lower Manhattan, and they go before judges there, and we provide free representation to those people. I would just note, immigrants in deportation proceedings do not have the right to counsel if they cannot afford an attorney. They don't have a right to counsel the way they do in a criminal matter. And
well, that's another step down, or it makes it even more difficult to defend your case or even present your case of why you ought to stay.
Yes, and although there is no federal right to counsel, the New York City, through a program called the New York Immigrant Family Unity Project, has gone above and beyond other jurisdictions and actually funded a public defender program for immigrants in removal proceedings who are in detention. So the immigration attorneys who work at the Bronx Defenders meet clients on a weekly basis who are going before an immigration judge for the first time, and many of our clients down at the Varick Street Court have actually come into ICE custody because they were apprehended at a courthouse, whether it's in the Bronx, Manhattan, or any of the other boroughs. And so, we see the problem on the ground. We see it on the flip side, on the later end, once somebody has had that unfortunate fate.
Fascinating and chilling in some ways. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio and Governor Mario Cuomo, right? And that's the bridge. Andrew Cuomo have both declared New York to be sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. And so it is logical, I suppose, for this dialogue to be happening in the Bronx and in New York. Is it this way in other places that are not declared sanctuary cities? Do other municipalities understand that maybe courts should be off limits because it intrudes on the justice process? Or are we fortunate or unfortunate that that's the way it is here in New York?
So I think that what you've identified is there's a little bit of a tension there, right? That we are a sanctuary city and that we do have some policies that are quite favorable to immigrants, immigrant New York City.
More favorable maybe than in other places.
I can't speak to sort of whether or not ICE is apprehending people in courthouses in other jurisdictions with sort of a greater frequency than here in New York or a less frequency, but I would say that the fact that New York State, right, the court administration of New York State hasn't yet enacted any policies that would restrict federal immigration agents' ability to pick people up from courts stands in pretty stark contrast with our legacy as being a sanctuary city, because I don't think that you can have a state court system where a significant portion of New York State residents are fearful to exercise their right to due process and to come to court, right? When that happens, the whole system, you lose integrity in the system. So I think that there is a bit of tension there between calling ourselves a sanctuary jurisdiction and letting immigration officers snatch people up in courthouses.
Do you have a sense of what the mood is? I mean, I think we all know what the mood is in Washington, but what the mood is amongst the New York State legal community, in particular all the way up to the chief judge? In other words, on this issue, or to the borough president's credit, his raising it gets the ball rolling and the dialogue happening.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't speak to really what's going on in the minds of the folks at the state legislature, but I will say that there has been sort of a groundswell of advocacy, particularly in the last few weeks, as we see more and more New York City residents getting picked up in this unconscionable way. And you do have people like the Bronx Borough President who are making impassioned pleas with the Chief Judge to enact some sorts of policies that actually severely restricts immigration agents' ability to do what they're doing.
I can appreciate your use of the word unconscionable from your perspective. Now, there are many people who might be watching the program who say, well, I still don't, I think undocumented should be dealt with more harshly than we have in the past. I wonder if they would view this as, well, you know what, maybe it should be not necessarily a sanctuary city, but a sanctuary place where we ought to let justice play out and not have this intrude on it. All right, we're gonna go back to Mr. Levy, and then we're gonna ask his conclusions, and we're gonna ask you a similar question for your issue. So back to the bail question. What would fix this system? And I know you probably have your own personal thoughts, but from a realistic perspective, to keep it fair and protect the public, what do we need to do?
Well, I mean, one thing just as a starting point, New York City in particular is already doing pretty well. We can always improve, but compared to other places in the country, we actually have a very high rate of release, as I mentioned before, and our bail statute, the law that we actually have in place, is one of the most progressive bail statutes in the country, if not the most progressive bail statute.
I wonder if you're fighting a losing battle. Well, you're already there.
But the issue, which we sort of alluded to before, is that our statute just isn't used properly right now. There are 9 alternative forms of bail, but we really only use 2. We use cash bail and commercial bail bonds, right? If we started actually using the current law to its full potential, we would make even greater steps toward a healthier pretrial justice system. We could also do the other thing that we've alluded to, which is ask judges to calibrate bail to what people can actually make. Right? So if we are going to remain with a money bail system, with financial obligations, we should ask judges to say, well, can this person actually make it? Because bail is supposed to be a mechanism for release, not for detention.
And we'll go back to the word that you brought up on the program, and that is to calibrate. So let's figure out what makes sense. Using a rather famous defendant, Shelley Silver, probably could afford more than somebody else who was arrested for a different sort of crime in the Bronx. So that's what you're talking about.
Yes.
All right. So now, is it as simple as saying keep at it and drawing a line around the courthouse? Although, they could stand outside and grab somebody when they walk out if they identify who they are. They are public buildings,
Yeah.
How do you see it?
I mean, I see it like this. ICE has already recognized that there are certain sensitive locations where they have a policy of not picking those individuals up at. For example, hospitals, places of religious worship. I personally think that courthouses in New York State should be treated also as sensitive locations where we aren't going to punish people for seeking their day in court, right? We as a community believe that due process rights that one is availing themselves of when they go to court are sacred enough such that people shouldn't have an external fear that stymies them from showing up in court, whether it's to defend themselves in a criminal proceeding or try to be reunified with their children in family court or seeking redress under a housing court violation. So I do think that ICE could designate courts as a sensitive location and not choose to go pick people up, sort of this low-hanging fruit of hundreds of New Yorkers who are in court every day. But I also think that New York State could take a significant step and enact policies that severely limit ICE's ability to come into those court spaces.
Then it's not a matter of kind of a handshake, it's a matter of a legal matter, and you can deal with it that way.
Sure.
Listen, you guys are great, and having you work with the Bronx Defenders to seek justice is vital, and also really nice that you came on the program today to help inform all of us about these two very, very important issues that I think really don't get talked about enough. So Scott Levy from Bronx Defenders, thank you. Sarah Deri Oshiro from Bronx Defenders, thank you. And we hope to have you back on the show one time soon.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at BronxTalk@BronxNet.org. You can send us a tweet at BronxTalk or post them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. And if you have questions, legal questions about your own personal situation, I will personally make sure they get addressed and get back to you with an answer. I think that's a very important part of it. You can see the archives of Bronx Talk at BronxNet.org. You can find Bronx Talk by following the Watch menu, which is on the nice new BronxNet website. Now, next week, a whole different point of view, a lovely holiday show with one of the Bronx's best youth programs, the Renaissance Youth Center. It's really going to be a lot of fun. This was serious. That's going to be fun. Thanks to our producer, who is Lindsay Violet. Our director is William Guzman. We will see you next week.